Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use Ajax with the .NET MVC framework. So what you'll see is something like this. I will have a bunch of radio buttons with a user associated. When I click them, the updates are displayed at the bottom. You notice the timestamp here shows that every time I click there is maybe a second or two of elapsed time. However, the main part of the page here is not updated. And so that's the magic of Ajax, is that you can do partial page updates. And so that's what we're going to see right ahead. So in this tutorial, we're going to create two different versions of this application. We're going to create the version where you have to create the button that says display results and the entire page will refresh. And then in the second part of the tutorial, we'll create the Ajax version, and so you can see the distinction between the two. So let's get started coding. So I'm working with Visual Studio 2019. I'm going to choose a .NET Framework ASP web application. So I'm going to name my project something like Customers with Ajax in it so you can see what the demo is about. The .NET Framework is 4.7.2. For my project, I'm going to choose Empty, select the MVC folder, no authentication, and click Create. The first part of the application is to create an object or a model. So let's go into the Models folder, right-click, and add a new one. So the object I'm going to work with is called Customer. So we'll choose Code, Class, and name it Customer. Each customer is going to have three properties. We'll give it an ID number, a name, and their age. So an int, a string, and an integer. Next, let's create a constructor. So I'll right-click and choose the quick shortcuts, and then create a constructor with all of the properties. So we're done with the customer's model for now. Let's go ahead and close it and save it. The next part of this process is to create a controller. So let's go into the controllers and add a new one. So right-click, add a new controller. Let's choose Empty and Add. I will call it Customer Controller. So in this controller, I'm going to get some data that we can display on the app. Usually we would get it from a database and insert it here. But to cut the tutorial down to size, let's just do hard coding. So in this controller, I want to open up a view called Customer. So I'll put inside of the view parentheses the word Customer. Now let's go ahead and create that customer view. So we'll right-click inside the code and choose Add View. So I'm going to name it Customer and not associate any model with it yet, and then we'll uncheck the layout page. Now in this application, I'm going to use a layout and have a header, a body, and the customer details. So let's create a new layout. So in order to do that, I'm going into the Views folder and I'm going to add a new folder. Let's call the folder name Shared. In the Shared folder, I'm going to right-click and choose Add a View. I'm going to name it _ layout. And so this will be the defining page for all of the parts of our app. So I'm going to change three things about this layout. First of all, we'll change the title so it'll get the page title value, so @page.title. Then inside of the body, we're going to render two things. We will render the header of the page, which hasn't been created yet, but we will soon make it, and then we will render the body. So the next piece I want to create is that header. So let's right-click in the Shared folder, choose the New View. We'll choose a partial page and we'll name it _header. When we click OK, we will get a blank page. So for the header, we're going to need a welcome message. So put something on there that says welcome to the customer Ajax example or something similar. And then in the second line, I want to display the current time when this page was rendered. And so I'll just simply say the current time is, and I'm going to use a razor syntax here to say @datetime.now. And so that will change every time the browser is refreshed. The next part of my application is going to be the customer's details section. So this is the part of the page that shows as the gray box. So I'm going to create this page and call it Customers Detail, using the underscore since it's a partial page. I'm going to include the model for the customer and make sure that it's just in an empty data format. Now I'm going to also select that I'm going to create it as a partial view, and I'm going to use the script libraries. And so this is the part that will happen in the Ajax routine. This will be updated, only this partial page. So what I want to display in the customer details is the name of the person and their age. So the helper that I'm going to search for is at html.displayNameFor. So we're going to get the name, and then that's going to be the display name. Plus, I'm going to show the actual value. So display for, and then use the arrow function to show the actual value of the name. And I'll put in a line break. The other part of the person's identity I would like to show is their age. So we'll copy and paste the line and then change name to age for each of them. Lastly, I would like to show that this is updated at a specific time, because this partial page will be updated while the main page is not updated. And so comparing the two timestamps will be instructive in just a few minutes. So that should be enough information to display the details of the customer. Let's move back to the controller now. So next I'm going to define some data for my application. First of all, I need to get the customer object in the customer model. So I'll type in the word customer, which is the name of my model, and then the word customer in lowercase. I have to include the using statement so that I can get to the models. Now the customer model we defined just a few minutes ago in this file here called customer. So I'm going to keep track of two pieces of data, not only a single customer, but also an entire list of them. So I will name the second variable as customers with a plural. So now down in the index function, let's define the customers list. So we'll create it as a new list of type customer. It's an empty list. Next, I would like to add a customer to the list. So remember, this would usually come from a database. Here we're going to code them individually. So inside the add function, let's put in a new customer. So I'll just define a new customer with a constructor. So this customer is ID 0, her name is Sherry, and she's 37 years old. So let's copy and paste the first line and then duplicate it maybe 6 times. Then for each of those, let's change the ID number to something unique. So I'll just go 1 through 6, and then let's make up a new name for each person. So you can choose any name you like. I'm going to pick Sherry, Tim, Charlene, Dan, and Dane, I guess it is, and Elijah, Howard, and Dave. And then make up an age for each of them. So we just need some data that's somewhat unique to each person. So I apologize, but I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to take all this data and instantiate it inside a constructor. So let's right-click in the code here and create a new constructor with no parameters, so just a basic constructor. And then I'm going to copy or cut and paste all of the data that I just created into the controller. Next, I'm going to save two pieces of data together. I want to save the entire list, and I want to save a single customer. So a good data structure for this is called a tuple. So a tuple might be new to you. It's basically just a pair of items, so like an ordered pair. So I want to define my tuple as a list followed by a single item. So it's a list of customers, and then I want to make a single customer. So that will be my tuple. The reason why I'm creating this is I want to send this to my form or to my view as two separate pieces of data. So to define this specific tuple, I'm going to create a new tuple, and the same format with the list is the first item and then the single customer is the second item. So for the first time I display the items, I want to display the entire list, and then I'm going to select the first one, or item 0, as the selected item. So this tuple will contain two items, a full list and a single customer. So now when I get to line 42 in my code, I'm going to add tuple as the parameter that's being sent to the view. So the first thing you do in a view is define what kind of data is on it. That's the model statement. And so I will define the group that it's being expected. So it's a tuple, which is the list of customers, and then followed by a single customer. That's what I just defined in the controller just a minute ago. Now you notice it does not allow me just to use the word customer here. It is not included yet in this file. So on the first line, I'm going to include the statement at using, and then the project name, which is customers Ajax, dot, and select models. And so now the customer object resolves itself here in the code. Let's also define this layout. So inside of the predefined at symbol area, layout equals, and we'll point to the folder called shared, and layout is the file. The first thing I want to define on my page is a form. So I'll use at using, and then html.beginForm. We'll fill in the details of what kind of action is related to the form in a few minutes. If you've looked at other forms that are generated in .NET MVC, you'll see this item called the anti-forgery token. And so this is a security measure that you should include on every one of your forms, and it automatically ensures that no codes are intercepted between a code input from a form and the controller behind it. Now we're going to display every item of our user list on the page, and the button is either going to be selected or not selected. By default, we will set a variable called selected to be equal to false. So next I want to cycle through each item in my model. So I'll use a for each loop, and I'll say var customer in model. When I put a dot, you can see that there are two different items, item 1 and item 2. That's because up on line 2 we defined our model as a tuple that has two things in it. So the first item is a list, so we'll use for each item in item 1. So for the items that we're going to display, I'm going to show a radio button. So we'll use .html.radio button. The value of the radio button, we'll call it as customer number, and we will associate the customer's ID with it. This will come important again when we process the form. We're going to need to know this field name. And for default, I'm going to have this not selected. So that's what the false means, not selected. So the second thing I want to display after the radio button is the customer's name. So we'll create a label and we'll print customer name. Now I want to conditionally set this form to have this button selected or not selected. So we will check to see if the index of this customer item is equal to 0, we'll change it to selected equals true. Finally, we need to create a submit button at the bottom of the page. So we'll do an input, type equals submit, we'll give it an ID such as submit button, and the value will be what's displayed on the button. So we'll call it display details. So it's now time to test this out. Let's run the app. Now any application errors that you see were totally planned. We wanted to make sure that you have the opportunity to troubleshoot if we create some errors. So I launch the application and I navigate to where my route is expected to be. So that's the word /customer after the address. And let's see what happens. So we've got some errors, just as I promised. Let's take a look here, and it says I could not find the layout called shared layout. And I went and I looked in this path called ~views customer. Okay, so we can see right now that I named the layout incorrectly. So let's go fix that. So the view that I'm looking at here is in the customer view. Let's go check out the code here. So the layout could not be found. Well, I made two mistakes here. First of all, I need to tell it which directory it's in. So let's do a ~views. I think it's called views with an S, shared. And I think I have to put in the file extension as well. So sh.html. We'll save that. So this time when I run the application, it looks like I have displayed the items correctly. So I have the header and I have this item here, which is all the people in the list. So congratulations. Now the next part that we have to put in is the details item down here. We have not included that yet. And so the details will show the item that is selected. So for instance, if I select Tim, I should see Tim's name and age printed at the bottom of the form. So, but this video is getting a little long, so we'll take care of the details at the bottom of the page in the next video. Hey, welcome back to another video for our Ajax example. In this next video, we're going to add some functionality to part 2 of our application. So if you haven't seen part 1, check it out. Otherwise, we'll continue on to add an Ajax element to this page. So the Ajax element that we're going to put is at the bottom here below the button called Display Results. So down here at the bottom, we're going to update some of the user information. So we'll show the user name, and we will also show their age. So let's jump right in here to the customer file, and we're going to add some stuff at the bottom. So what we're about to add here is a partial view down at the bottom. We want to include the customer information, and so it will be a customer details section. Now we also need to pass some data to this, and as you recall, our model has two parts to it. Part 1 is the list of customers, and part 2 is the currently selected customer. So we're going to pass part 2 to it. So for the HTML code, I'm going to enclose this in a div tag because we want to reference this specifically on the page as a separate item. Then inside of there, I'm going to tell the HTML helper to create a partial insert. So we'll create a partial view. And then the last part is going to be the two different parameters. So the first parameter will be the view name, and then the second part will be the data that we want to display on that view. And since we want to have one single customer displayed here, the second part of our model is what we'll select. Now, for the first parameter, I'm going to put in the name of the view. The partial view is called customer details, and I put in the file extension. Also, I would want to make sure that I put in the pathway so that way the layout can find this file. So let's put in views/shared as our previous parts of the pathway. Lastly, I want to make sure that the div has a class name. This will be for two purposes. First of all, we can use some CSS formatting to make this thing stand out as a different part of the page. And just as important, Ajax is going to require that this section of the page be identified with a unique number. This time when we run the page, you notice the customer details at the bottom. So the first item in the list is Sherry, and her age is 37. Also, it tells me when this part of the page was updated. So we've got ourselves the partial view, and we've got the header and the main body. Now all we have to do is create some click events to make this happen and update the details at the bottom of the page. Now, if you're a very astute viewer, you will see there's an error on my page. You can see that Sherry is the selected customer, but in my list, Sherry does not have the selected bullet item for her radio. So why doesn't my code display what I said was selected? Let's go find out. So let's begin back in the controller, and you can see that I am sending to my view two items. I am sending the list of customers, and then I'm telling it that I want customer 0 to be the selected item. So why doesn't it display that way? Well, let's go look in the customer item here and see this loop. So the selection process happens here on lines 15 through 19. It says, if the first item is item 0, then set the selected to true. Well, the first item is selected and it is 0. However, the second time through the loop, selected is still true. And so I forgot to put in an else statement. So the first fix for my error is I'm going to put an else selected equals false. Let's see what that does. And now when I run the application, you can see that Sherry is selected here with the radio button. That's very good. I'm going to make another change and you will see that we'll even have a better program. Let's go back to the controller. Now this time, let's say I want item 2 to be selected. So that would actually be the third item in the list, which should be Charlene. Okay, let's see if Charlene shows up as selected item. So I run the application and you can see that the customer details shows Charlene, 98. She is selected. However, Sherry is still the one with the red or the bullet item on it. So why didn't Charlene get it? Well, let's go fix that. So the problem now lies in this line here, in line 16. It says, I will always select item 0 to be the first one with a bullet on the radio button. So let's delete the line that I just said was a problem and let's recode it. So I'm going to now ask if item 2 in the list is the same one that's in the current loop called customer. If those match, then we'll set the bullet or the radio button to be true. So now you can see I finally got it right. So Charlene is selected and the controller said, well, let's light up the radio button for Charlene and let's display her details. Now in the next part here, I want to be able to click this item and it will bring us to a new updated form. As you can see right now, it goes back to the customer controller and the controller then resets the selected item to Charlene every time and keeps showing Charlene down here. So we want to return a number to the controller when we choose display details and then that will update the display. But let's save that for the next video. Coming right up. Hey, welcome. We're in the middle of an Ajax demonstration and we're about ready to create this display details button. Right now, if I click my project and I choose display details, nothing changes. However, that will all change in just a minute. So to accomplish the goals for this video, we are going to have to create a method that will respond to the display details. So let's go fix that. Now to control where a method goes after the click is done, we need to go to the first line of the form called begin form, and this is where we will change the direction of the form input. So there are two parameters that we need to add to the begin form idea. So the first parameter is the action that will be called at the controller. And so I'll invent a name. It's called onSelectCustomer. The second parameter is the actual name of the controller. And so we have a customer controller, and I only need to put the word customer here. Now when I run this, this will probably break because we don't have an actual event for onSelectCustomer. So I have the customer items listed again. Now let's select somebody like Elijah and then display details. And sure enough, the application broke. And it says here, I could not get to this link here, onSelectCustomer. So we haven't created it yet, so that's why it didn't work. Let's go fix that. So to respond to a form insert or form submit event, we need to come back into the controller. So the controller has an action that we can just copy and paste. So let's do that and rename it. So from the customer form, I told it I was expecting to see onSelectCustomer as the name of an action. And so we'll just rename it as that. The rest of the code is identical. As you can see, the same data is sent back to the form. So this would actually give you the exact same result as the original action. What's going to be different? Well, we are going to expect to find out which item was selected and then change that in the return. So the key item here is on line 45. So when we do onSelectCustomer, we are expecting to get some data back from the form. And the item that we're looking for is called customer number. Now where did that come from? Well, the word customer number comes from the customer form or the view. And you can see that the radio button has the ID number of the guy or the girl that's selected, and then it has the label that goes with it or the value name. So customer number is what I'm thinking about. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going back into the controller and replace this one here because I had forgotten to put in a capital C. So that's very important that you match those names exactly. So now I have a customer number, and it comes in the form of a string. We need to change this. So now instead of selecting item 2 each time, I'm going to send it back the customer number. So I'll just put customer number inside the square brackets, and everything will work fine, right? Doesn't look like it. There's a problem. What's it say there? It says I'm expecting an integer for an index of a list item. Well, of course, we need an integer. And customer number is really a string. Well, it comes in the form of a string, but let's convert it into an integer. So in C#, one of the methods that you can use to convert from a string to an integer is the int32.parse. So if you indeed send a number in the form of a string, this will work. If you send something besides a number, of course, this will crash the program. But this should work because of our well-formed view that we just created. So it looks like the application still runs. Now let's go ahead and select somebody like Tim and choose display results. So now the entire form is updated. You can see that the time down here at the bottom is different than it was just a second ago. Every time I click somebody and choose display results, the form refreshes and we get Howard and age 64 at the bottom. So that takes us to a non-Ajax example. We haven't gotten to the partial page updates yet, but we at least have our form working so that we can select somebody and then we get a return value that comes back to the details of the customer. So in the next part, we're going to change this so that this date time stamp up at the beginning will always remain the same. In other words, the page will not refresh, but every time we update, we will see the bottom section will indeed refresh because we are only displaying the differences that need to be rendered, not the entire page. So that's the magic of Ajax. So let's come up with that just in a moment here. Hey, welcome. We're in the middle of an Ajax demonstration, and we're about ready to create this display details button. So before we start programming in Ajax, we need to make sure that we have the right files installed on our system. So let's go check out our dependencies using nuget. So the key word that we're looking for is called jQuery unobtrusive. So I'm going to search for the word unobtrusive and make sure that it's installed. So it does say here that it is installed. Just in case it's not working, I'm going to uninstall it and then reinstall it. So I'm just verifying that this is here. So let's select the Ajax jQuery unobtrusive and choose install using the latest. Okay, so that seems to be verified. I can close nuget. So next, let's switch over into the layout file and add some dependencies or some scripts at the top of our page. So let's jump into the scripts folder as well and expand to see what we have installed. Well, you can see that the unobtrusive Ajax is here, so I'm going to just drag this into the header area and it will automatically include a script. We are also going to need the jQuery plugin as well, so let's go to the latest that I have installed. So just dragging them in gives us these two imports. Now let's go back into the customer view and let's make some modifications. So this is the non-Ajax view. I'm going to modify this, so let's make a copy of what I have created so far and keep it for backup. So I'll right-click, copy, and then paste so that I have a backup. So I'll rename my project file here as customer no Ajax, so it's obvious of what this thing does. At the very top of the page, I'm going to add a new reference to something called Ajax Options. And so Ajax Options is a class that's built in here, and we're going to put some preferences in here to allow us to figure out what we want to do with it. So the first option for Ajax is to handle the form request. Is it going to be a GET or a POST? Well, I'm just going to choose POST. And then the next item is called the insertion mode. So what is an insertion mode? Well, we are going to update a partial page, and we can do several things with it. We can add to the page, or we can replace what's already there. And so what I'm looking for my option is called the replace. The last option for Ajax options is going to be to tell it which part of the page is going to be partially replaced. And so at the very bottom of the page where we have customer info, this is why I created a div with an ID tag on it. So the item that we're looking for is called update target ID, and we have to have letter for letter exactness to make sure that this is working. So customer info is the name of my ID at the bottom of the page. Now the next item that I'm going to upgrade here is line 14. So instead of doing an HTML for begin form, we're going to say Ajax begin form. And so this will look for an Ajax request instead of a full form submit. Now you can see that it's expecting me to do something else in this form now. And the third thing that it's missing are the Ajax options. So the object that I just defined in the previous lines will include here on the Ajax method. Okay, so you think the application is ready to go? Not quite. It's pretty close, but I've made several errors, and I'm going to show you each one of them and how to diagnose them. So first of all, let's go ahead and pick somebody. So I'm going to select Elijah and display the results. Well, we've got kind of what we wanted. We have a partial page update, but I get the entire page again. So what happens if I choose Howard in display? Well, I get Howard selected below, but obviously this isn't quite what I want. So let's return and fix a few things. So the problem is probably occurring here in the customer controller. So what I want to return now in this method is not a full view. I want to return a partial view. So I'm going to put in the word partial, and sure enough, partial view is an option. So the word customer is now the wrong thing. I'm not updating the entire page, which as you can see what I was getting earlier. I want to just do part of the page. So the part that I'm looking for is this section here called customer details. Well, let's go ahead and update this item here. So let's go underscore customer details. And now this is going to break something, so we'll be careful about that. Also, you notice here that the method type up here should be the word post. So let's put in HTTP post, and that's what the action should be expecting. All right, well, let's check this out now. So now I'm going to return a partial view, and it's not going to display the whole page. This still won't work, but we'll find out another error in a second. All right, the application's up and running again. Let's pick somebody and choose display results. I get nothing. What's wrong? There's no errors on the page, or are there? Let's check it out inside of the inspection. So right-click, choose Inspect, and then in your console over here, you're looking for something called Network. Okay, so Network tells you what's going on inside of your code. Let's go ahead and try this again. So I'm going to select Howard this time and display results. Now you can see that the network tells me that the onSelect customer has a status of 500. So 500 error in web language means the programmer did something wrong. Well, that's you, so let's fix it. We can see the error if I select here and click it. Aha! Now I see some information that I can work with. So it says we have the wrong model passed into the this view. It says you sent me this tuple and the partial view is only expecting a customer. Aha, we can fix that. So let's come back down into here and notice instead of sending the entire tuple, we want to send just this section right here, which is the last, or it's the customer that's selected. So that might be a lot more helpful. So let's see if that works now. So we're going ahead and run it again. Okay, the application's running. Here it is. Drum roll, please. Let's go ahead and pick Dane and choose Display Details. Hooray! We've got ourselves Dane and the age 24 down at the bottom. Now, is it actually doing the partial updates? So you can see that the time that I loaded the page was 11:58 seconds. And every time I click Display Results, the time at the bottom changes, but the time at the top remains the same. So that means that this page down here is partially updated whenever I click Display Details, and then the part at the top of the page is left static. What's the advantage? Well, a smaller page refresh obviously takes less time and less server traffic. And so that's a great way to make your pages more efficient. If I choose the refresh for the entire page, the time here now matches the time at the bottom. And so the partial pages here are only working for this section here. So congratulations, you've got Ajax working. We're going to do one more video to fix up some things. What I want to do next is that when I select Dane or Elijah, this section down here automatically updates and the Display Details button then becomes irrelevant. Also, let's do some CSS work to make this look a lot better. That's coming up in the next video. Hey, welcome back to the fourth part of our Ajax series with ASP.NET. So far we've got an application that will update partial pages. In this video, I'm going to automate this so that when I click a radio button, the entire update will happen without clicking Display Details. And then we'll go and do some CSS work to make it look a lot better. So to accomplish our goal, I'm going to have to create some JavaScript so that when I select a button like Elijah, it will automatically trigger the event that was associated with this button. And so we'll go in and fix that right now. So I'm here in the customer views and I want to create a new item so that way we can reference the action of this form. So I'm going to put in something kind of cryptic here. I'm going to add a new parameter to the form and say new with curly brackets. What that means is that it's a new element that will be displayed on the web page. Now all I need to do is give this thing an ID, and it'll be clear in a minute why I'm giving it an ID. So you can invent a name. I'm going to call mine customer form. Now just the same, down here in the radio button, I'm going to add another parameter and call it new curly brackets. And I'm going to insert some JavaScript in here that will cause the form to be submitted automatically. So the JavaScript that I'm looking for is the event called onChange. So onChange means whenever this value is changed. Now notice it has a lowercase c, so don't use a capital C, it just won't do anything if you make it wrong. So the JavaScript code that I'm putting in here is actually from jQuery. So $ parentheses is a way to reference an item on the page. Following that, I'm going to say what event is associated with this. So I'm going to trigger a submit event. So one button will act as the form submit now. Almost forgot that I need to put in a £, because the ID of customer form is what I'm referencing up here. And in jQuery, a £, will give you the ID item. All right, here we go. Let's see what happens. Now when I clicked Elijah, you notice that Elijah 51 automatically is updated. And so every time I click one of these guys, the update form is triggered and the partial page update is done. So this Display Details button now becomes irrelevant and we can comment it out. So we'll comment it out and say this is not required since we are using the onChange event on the radio button. So since that seems to work, let's go and fix the CSS part. So the customer layout here is what I want to do next. So let's click in Shared and Layout. At the top of the screen, we already included some JavaScript. Now let's go ahead and add some CSS. So I'm looking for the folder called Content over here, and I do not see it. So we need to add the Bootstrap CSS for us. So let's go into NuGet. So right-click on the customer project, and then choose Manage NuGet Objects. Then inside of here, we will browse, search for Bootstrap, and I'm going to select the most current version, which it shows like that it's 4.4.1 right now, and we will install it. After it installs, we can close the NuGet Manager and come back into our code. Now I have this folder that I mentioned earlier that was not there earlier called Content. So what I'm looking for is Bootstrap min and the CSS version, and let's drag it up into our header. And so we automatically have a link, a reference, and a style sheet. We run the application again, and you can see right away that all the fonts have changed. Now there's a few more things that will make this look better, but we can see that Bootstrap is working. Let's go back into the layout item, and I'm going to add a class to the div here around our body. So the word class here is, of course, a CSS thing, and now I need to know exactly what I'm looking for in Bootstrap. So I'm looking for the word container, and I think it's called container-body, which will give us two different class names that will format this correctly. So sure enough, once I get the container item around this thing, you can see that it's indented. And so the CSS now shows that it's all done in Bootstrap with the Arial font. One more thing I'd like to set off is that the customer details section, since it is a special case, needs to have maybe a rectangle around it. So let's come back into layout, and I'm going to add one extra custom style thing. So I could either do it inline like this, or I could add a separate file, but I'll do it right here. So inside the style, let's go ahead and add the ID number for this customer info area. So # customer info, and then inside we can tell it what we want this to be. So the style, I'd like to have a border. Let's do it black and solid, and let's create a slight radius around the edge. So that's a rounded corner, and then give it a background color of light gray, let's say. Okay, let's get the style on the screen and see how it looks. Hey, there it is. We've got ourselves a block at the bottom of the page. And so customer details now stands out as somewhat distinct. One more detail maybe would be good is to put some padding in here, and then our app's done. So I'll slip in a line called padding, and 5 pixels should do. And there it is. We've got a complete app. We've got ourselves Ajax happening in real time. So I put the gray box around here to emphasize two things. One, it's good design so the user can see it. But maybe more important is the emphasis on this lesson here, is that Ajax is meant for partial page updates, and it requires special handling in your controller. So take a look here and study this, because when you create other applications, you'll be using the exact same process to update a partial page with Ajax. So thanks for sticking with me for 4 parts. We're going to continue on with another tutorial in the next video.